If anyone still believed that the Republican Party had become a party of economic populism, the tax bill that the party is set to pass in Congress will burst their bubble. This bill raises taxes on the poor and cuts taxes on the rich. Most of the American people disapprove. Senate Republicans negotiated in secret at top speed, and then passed the bill at 1:50 a.m. on a Saturday, as if to minimize public scrutiny. The original American populists were the men and women of the Populist Party who demanded open government and income taxes on the rich. This tax bill is exactly the sort of thing that made them howl in outrage. But the Republican tax strategy has roots in the American populist tradition, too. That strategy is to disregard experts and rile up the base with tax policy arguments that would not survive professional scrutiny. Populists did this on behalf of the poor. But the man who first put this strategy to work for rich people was Andrew Mellon, the millionaire who became Secretary of the Treasury after World War I. Poor veterans of the war were clamoring for expensive public benefits. Rich men wanted their income taxes rolled back. Mellon squared the circle by inventing a supply-side argument: cutting income tax rates would actually increase tax revenues. In particular, he said, cutting the top income tax rates would encourage rich people to pull their money out of tax shelters and invest in creating jobs. Or, as Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin has said of the current Republican tax plan, cutting income taxes will pay for itself with growth. To sell his tax plan, Mellon copied the rhetoric and tactics of the original populist movement. He took the supply-side argument to the people with a mass-market book called Taxation, the People's Business. The subtitle ripped off a populist slogan. The populist leader Charles McKeown once said that government is a business organization for carrying on the public business in a common-sense, business-like manner, and Mellon's writing also mimicked the populists' lecture style. Instead of an economic model, he gave his readers a folksy anecdote about an overtaxed farmer. He also raised money for a grassroots campaign to mobilize support for income tax cuts in parts of the country where almost no one was rich enough to benefit personally from those tax cuts. These activists did not have to win a majority of the public. They just had to win enough grassroots support to intimidate members of Congress in a few key districts. The activists got a tax cut, but more important, they wrote a playbook. Veterans of the campaign for the Mellon Plan kept campaigning for income tax cuts through World War II. When runaway inflation put tax reform back on the agenda in the 1970s, conservative activists dusted off those old policy proposals. They copied the old tactics, too, including the recruitment of organizers to run grassroots campaigns far outside Washington. These conservative activists picked up Mellon's book and they copied Mellon's argument: tax cuts for the rich will pay for themselves with economic growth. Today's Republican Party is the party that those activists made. Congressional Republicans who came up in the populist tax revolts of the 1970s abandoned the old party orthodoxy of balanced budgets and rebranded themselves as the tax-cutting party. They embraced the idea that deficits don't matter as long as those deficits result from Republican tax cuts. They also stopped treating tax policy as a delicate matter for economists to discuss behind closed doors and started treating it as a set of punchy talking points for the public. They built organizations with names like Americans for Tax Reform and Americans for Prosperity that campaigned for income tax cuts with demonstrations and postcards from far outside the Beltway. Those organizations eventually grew strong enough to threaten that Republicans would face primary challengers if they ever increased income taxes. The essence of this strategy is to take tax policy out of the hands of experts and entrust it to activists. These campaigns do not usually have much credibility with card-carrying economists. But the Republicans in Congress do not seem to want that credibility. Those of us who oppose the present tax bill have sometimes swung too far in the other direction. Some of our complaints make it sound as if we think tax policy should be made by an exclusive club of people with PhDs. Secretary Nukin did not commission a thorough economic analysis. The Senate did not wait for a joint tax committee analysis of the bill's effects. The idea behind complaints like these is that the bill is bad because it is amateurish. The unspoken afterthought, tax policy should be left to the experts. If the original populists were right about one thing, it is that tax policy is too important to be left to the experts alone. The process of drafting this tax bill was outrageous, but the outrage is not that the economists were shut out of the process. It is that almost everyone was shut out of the process. Democracy does not demand that we defer to experts wielding scientific models that almost no one understands. What it demands is that we have a full and open discussion in which the people, including experts among us, have access to accurate information about the policies under discussion. In a good process, we would all have an opportunity to educate ourselves and one another, and our elected officials would have access to the best wisdom of a well-informed public. Taxation really is the people's business. Opponents of this tax bill should embrace that vision of democracy and reclaim their own populist roots. It will not be hard. The tax bill pays for corporate tax cuts by increasing individual income taxes on poor and middle-class Americans in the long run. That tax increase will make people hopping mad. Another wave of economic populism is coming, and people who favor progressive taxation should not retreat to the seminar room.